let's move in to another part. This is actually the last part of this part two of our first podcast, social justice. This is going to be such an important part of our podcast. But for this first one, I want to lay the foundation for what really needs to happen for there to be any, like, for real change, any lasting change. And for that to happen, I promise you, it is rooted in emotional intelligence skills, mental wellness skills. And once again, as a system, we do not teach them. And therefore, we are running around doing the same things that we've been doing as a society. Maybe a little bit better here, but not so much better there. Maybe a more improvement here. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, the things are better in some ways, in other ways, they're not. All right. And I'm not just focusing on the negatives to be negative. I'm saying that no, we're nowhere near close where we can be as a country, as a community, as schools, even as families, to where we should be and can be if we all get up on game on emotional intelligence skills. All right. So, this is Dr. Huberman, once again, my man, and he is going to, for about, I think, 10 minutes, talk about what needs to take place before we can even like really do this stuff, as my kids are having fun while we're doing the podcast. All right, here we go.
But I think that short of having people buffer their lives with tons of activities and perfect nutrition and perfect social interactions, people learning to control their autonomic nervous system, I think, is really the next step in our species evolution.
I'm going to run this back again. This is everything: breath work, meditation, learning how to make myself able to listen to stuff I don't want to listen to, or new ways of thinking, or things that make me uncomfortable. This is everything. So this is what he's talking about. So here we go. Thank you, Dr. Huberman. I don't think I'm going to stop this again. Here we go.
But I think that short of having people buffer their lives with tons of activities and perfect nutrition and perfect social interactions, people learning to control their autonomic nervous system, I think, is really the next step in our species evolution. I really believe that what we are seeing now in the world is a call to arms, if you will, or a request from Mother Nature to have everybody learn how to control their autonomic nervous system a little bit better, or ideally a lot better.
Yeah, it's absolutely critical, I think. I mean, right now, irrespective of what's going on with the pandemic and the political climate and the protests and all the upheaval that we're seeing, as a culture, we're experiencing an extraordinary poverty of attention and focus. We're so distracted by our devices. We're more anxious and stressed and depressed than we ever have been before. This is not going in a good direction. And to the extent that we can commandeer a little bit more control over these things and understand that we have some level of agency and we can reverse this sort of automatic pattern that we're on of just scrolling endlessly and doing what we're doing that we know is not leading us in a good direction, is critical if we're going to find our way forward. And to speak a little bit to what's going on right now, I think and it's related, and I'm interested in your thoughts on the neuroscience that is I think relevant to this, is that we've lost the ability to have civil discourse. There's a real breakdown in communication right now, culturally and socially, and it's fractured our society, and it's not good, right? So what is going on neurologically with human beings that are attaching themselves and so self-identifying with certain narratives that it's polarizing our population and preventing us from being able to just be together or united or agree upon what is true and what is not true and share a value system so that we can see our way through the challenges that we're facing right now, which many of which are an existential threat to the future of humanity and the planet.
It's a huge problem. You articulated it beautifully, and I think neuroscience can offer a couple insights into why it's happening and perhaps what we might do about it. So
When was this done?
In the 1960s, early 1960s. Several times, actually, and published twice, essentially the same data, different populations in the journal Science, which is sort of our Super Bowl, Science and Nature, Cell. Those are the big ones. Journals, that is. So the number one brain area that people want to stimulate, they finally hit this lever where they go, oh, I like that. And they just keep hitting that thing and hitting that thing and hitting that thing. Frustration and mild anger. And I saw that
That's
result.
The choice. I could be drunk. I could be happy. I'm going to choose frustration and anger.
Exactly.
Wow.
What that told us is it's clearly tapped into the dopamine reward system. It feels like a hit of dopamine to them more than anything else. So we need to put that on the shelf and keep it visible as we kind of march into this a sort of answer to your question. The other thing is an understanding that, and there's some recent data on this that are really impressive, not from my lab, but from another lab, which is that beliefs and information that supports our prior beliefs also increases the activity of these reward systems. So the more I see stuff that verifies what I already think or feel, that they are bad and they are good, or that we are good and they are bad, the more dopamine and adrenaline is released into my system, which we now know from our discussion a few minutes ago changes the way I view the world. It actually changes the way I view the world. It means that I'm going to see certain things and not see others. And this also relates to the auditory system. I'm going to hear certain things and not hear others. The things that verify.
I'm going to run this back a little bit, like a little bit of it. But I want me to think in terms of all of us, so what he's saying is that I am actually seeking to verify what I already believe because that makes me feel good. So if I don't like school, I'm going to seek things to verify why I don't like school. And that makes me, in a weird way, feel good. Okay? And it could be anything. All right? But I just wanted to narrow that down, not narrow down, but expand it rather into all areas of our life. We're talking about social justice right now, but it has everything to do with why it is so difficult to make changes and why, as this podcast is going to keep emphasizing, emotional intelligence skills are super crucial. All right. So let's run that back a little bit from Dr. Huberman, this little part. I don't know if I'm going to catch it right where I catch it. So he's going to put that on the shelf about, that was crazy, about mild anger and frustration being stuff that we actually seek also, that we like how that feels. Crazy. All right, here we go.
That on the shelf and keep it visible as we kind of march into this a sort of answer to your question. The other thing is an understanding that, and there's some recent data on this that are really impressive, not from my lab, but from another lab, which is that beliefs and information that supports our prior beliefs also increases the activity of these reward systems. So the more I see stuff that verifies what I already think or feel, that they are bad and they are good, or that we are good and they are bad, the more dopamine and adrenaline is released into my system, which we now know from our discussion a few minutes ago changes the way I view the world. It actually changes the way I view the world. It means that I'm going to see certain things and not see others. And this also relates to the auditory system. I'm going to hear certain things and not hear others. The things that verify my beliefs I'm going to feel rewarded for. The things that are counter to my beliefs, I'm not going to be as rewarded for. So we have all these barricades to empathy and to really listening and to really hearing what the other side is trying to say. And we have all these support networks in our body and our brain, which are building a bigger and bigger divide. Now, that's all very depressing. So the question is, what's the boat that's going to get us across that divide? And I believe, and I'm not just defaulting to this because it's what my lab works on, but I fundamentally believe that the boat that's going to get us to the other side is our ability to control our internal state, to be able to ratchet down our level of autonomic arousal just enough so that I can dilate not just my vision of what's happening in my immediate environment, but I can dilate my cognition, my thinking, to the possibility that there may be a kernel of value in what somebody else is saying, even if it's about me and I don't like what I'm hearing. Now, as somebody who spent time in the addiction treatment community, you probably know this is a lot of what you get good at as you learn to move through something that to you feels very good. And you know all the reasons why it would probably be good to change it, but you know what? You don't want to because it feels so good. So we're talking about an addiction to entrenched thinking. We're talking about an addiction and neurochemical systems that support lack of change, my refusal to change, and stubbornness. And I actually think, just like for the treatment of addiction and trauma, the key is to get people to learn to tolerate progressively higher levels of stress and maintain dilation of sensory experience, of thought experience. We've got to create some small little portals through which information can come in. A lot's been made of mirror neurons. I hate to break it to the crowd, but the data in support of mirror neurons in humans is not that impressive. And now the mirror neuron people are going to come after me, but fine. There are circuits in the brain that control emotional contagion, and those are what's powerful. My ability to recruit you into stress is much more powerful than my ability to recruit you into empathy for something good. That's a well-established neurobiological fact.
Or empathy for someone's perspective that I'm fundamentally going to disagree with.
Right. So I think there are 3 gates to getting there. And by there, I think I'm referring vaguely to the idea that we need to increase our level of understanding, at least our level of discourse, so that we can really hear other people's ideas, even though we don't like the way it feels, and we love the way that we feel. This is what that result said. We love the way we feel. We don't like the way other people feel. The first thing is to bring the level of urgency that we feel internally down. We need to learn to calm ourselves in order to really have the information start to come in. Now, the system right now and people out there, everyone's in a frenzy. And you can see it. The collective conscience is kind of losing its mind. It's kind of out of its mind. We need to learn how to turn off those amygdala circuits. So are we all going to get together and do EMDR? Probably not. Are we all going to get together and do breathing exercises? Probably not. Not at scale. What we need to do is start to figure out how we can, I think, especially for the next generation of kids, how to teach them to regulate their nervous system so that they recognize that pulse of adrenaline as placing them in a compromised position. Like, we have to leverage the idea that being able to hear and listen hinges on the ability to be calm. So therefore, the ability to be calm is crucial to hearing and hearing and listening is crucial to our advancement as individuals and as groups. The problem is everyone's been trying to do this backwards. They've said we all have to get along. We have to cancel culture. We all have to, listen to one another. And I think, again, we have to start from the inside. We have to teach it physiologically. Now, I don't have a master plan on how to do that, but one of the reasons I'm here and one of the reasons I'm, teaching neuroscience on Instagram and not just in my laboratory is until we can learn to regulate the self, I don't think we're going to get where we want to go as a culture. I think it really does start with our own individual ability to do that. And so, David's a really good example, for instance, of somebody who learned how to deal with his own internal mess and build something beautiful out of that. And he continues to do that. And
he's speaking about David Goggins, the world-renowned ultimate runner, ultimate fitness person, and all he went through as a young person, and has overcome a lot of that and turned his life into, helping others. All right.
Everyone's got to find that process for themselves. And whether or not you have a perfect family or whether or not you consider yourself the most inclusive and accepting person in the world or not, everyone needs to learn how to do that for themselves. And everyone thinks we do it pretty well, but I think it's clear that none of us do it well enough. So autonomic arousal, autonomic control, I think those are the entry points for addiction, for trauma, and for really empathic hearing and listening. And until we do that, I think our species is going to continue to go around this merry-go-round, where every 50 or 100 years we crash right up against the same general set of issues, only now social media has made it slightly more, or a lot more complicated.
Like, we obviously need organizational, institutional, and systemic changes. We need to change the way these social media platforms work, the way in which we're delivered information, and the way in which we're siloed. But I don't have any control over any of those things. The only thing I have control over is my own internal mechanism. So what other choice do we have?
Well, I think we need people in positions of power and leadership who are very good at internal control. I think emotions are great. I experience them often intensely, but
congratulations.
Thank you. They're not always wonderful to experience, but I think it's clear that the level of autonomic arousal that's associated with emotions, either very high or very low, very happy or very sad, very anxious or very angry, clouds our judgment. It's very clear, and I think the sooner
we give them too much credence too. They're just feelings, man. Like, we don't have to allow them to overtake us and monopolize everything that we do.
They were designed to push us along certain behavioral paths, but they've grown in importance in the last few years. And we could get into a discussion about how social media marketing are designed to capture these very deep limbic aspects of ourselves, and they are. But what's amazing is, and important, is that everybody has a forebrain. Some people's, it seems, there's more developed than others, but everybody has one, and we have this capacity for what we call top-down control, which is the ability to intervene in our own feeling states and our own action states.
Right? And no one's minimizing feelings or emotions or discounting them. It's simply that we have elevated, once again, we have normalized symptoms. We have normalized, all the things that go along with the feelings, but we haven't normalized what I can do to intervene when I'm feeling so sad or so angry or so hurt or so, upset or so can't believe right? So that's all he's saying. That's all we're talking about in this section. Now, let's keep moving on really quick. One last short one. And there's this whole concept of that's out there, that there's no reason for like white people to feel guilty about racism or the past or any of that kind of stuff. And I'm not going to really get into that during this podcast. We will. But what I want to get into is that, to lay the foundation, there's a huge difference between shame and guilt. Shame is totally not productive. It's counterproductive. It's whack. It's not okay. All right. Guilt, however, I'm not talking about living in guilt and staying in guilt. I'm just talking about that there's a difference between guilt and shame, and guilt can be very, very constructive and productive when used properly. And I want to use Dr. Brene Brown. She's going to talk just for a couple minutes about the difference between shame and guilt, and we're going to use this to inform the rest of our podcast in the social justice realm.
The thing about shame that's so hard to talk about is we have a visceral response to the word. And shame is not let's study this and talk about those people who have it. Like, you have it, I have it, and no one wants to talk about it.
So define it. Is it what we all think shame is?
It's, by definition, I think what emerged from the data for me is it's the deeply painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and somehow unworthy of connection, love, and belonging.
And everybody experiences this.
Everybody. It's a universal emotion.
Is it different from guilt?
Very different from guilt. So shame is really a focus on self, while guilt seems to be a focus on behavior. So shame, I am bad. Guilt, I did something bad. So just an example. I'm your teacher and I give you your test back and you get a 47 out of 100. Shame self-talk would be, God, I'm so stupid, I'm an idiot. Guilt self-talk would be, God, it was really stupid not to study for that. Man, not a good idea to go out last night. When we can focus on behavior, we are much more likely to respond with empathy and actually change. But it's like, one of the questions I get from parents all the time is like, my kid lied to me. And so I looked at my kid and I said, "You're a liar." And that's very shaming, right? You're a liar, not you told a lie and that's unacceptable and here are the consequences for telling a lie. When we call ourselves or other people liars or losers or, stupid, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Where do you go from there? As opposed to, look, you're a great kid, but you lied and that's completely not okay. And here are the consequences for lying. And if it happens again, here are the consequences. So when we are able to separate a focus on self and a focus on behavior, we're much more likely to be able to change the behavior. If we catch one of our kids saying, "God, I'm so stupid," when they're doing their homework, no. You can say, "God, I'm confused. I'm lost. I don't know what's happening." But "I'm stupid" is not going to work. We just don't talk to each other or ourselves like that in this house.
So, just to recap for the social justice part of this, we have got to we all have to practice the ability, the skills of how to prepare myself to listen with empathy and listen to different points of view in a way where I'm going to actually receive it and consider it. Okay? Yelling at each other has not worked. Threatening each other definitely doesn't work. Shaming each other doesn't work. Okay? Next podcast, next week, I have a story, just personal story regarding social justice and guilt and all that stuff. And I don't know, I just wanted to lay the groundwork for further discussions on this because we've been discussing it for centuries and centuries, and we've gotten to a certain point. But to get to where we need to go, we're going to need to do what Dr. Huberman said, which is practice the emotional intelligence skills of self-awareness and breath work and empathy, all of that stuff, as well as what Dr. Brown is saying, that no, guilt, to a certain degree is helpful and pushes me towards wanting to do the right thing. It points to having a value system also. All right. People that don't feel guilt about anything ever don't really have values that they live by. They're just like, "Oh, okay, whatever." Okay. And once again, this is not living in guilt or letting guilt hold me back. Or again, it's definitely not about shame. So I hope that lays the groundwork. That's where we're going to be operating from. All right. So that's the end of part 2. All right. Peace.